This isn't the one I ordered." Thaddeus Ironwood's voice cut through the heat of the Colorado afternoon like a blade. The words landed hard in the dusty street of Silver Ridge, sharp enough to stop conversation and turn heads. On the wooden steps of the stagecoach stood a woman who looked like she had already traveled too far on hope alone. I'm Rose Hartwell," she said softly, her voice shaking from exhaustion and fear. Lillian Rose Hartwell. She was not the woman from the photograph. Everyone could see that. She was immense, her body broad and powerful, beneath a travel dress stretched thin by the journey. Her cheeks were flushed from the long ride, dark hair slipping loose from its pins, brown eyes wide with the fragile courage of someone who had risked everything on a single chance. Thad Ironwood stared at her as if the earth itself had betrayed him. "I asked for Lily Hartwell," he growled. "Petite, Boston schoolteacher. This—" his hand gestured sharply at her body. "This is not what I agreed to." A ripple of murmurs spread through the gathered townspeople. Rose's hands tightened around her small carpet-bag. She had imagined this moment 1,000 times during the long ride west. She had rehearsed smiles, explanations, even rejection, but not this. "I wrote every letter," she said quickly, words tumbling over each other. "Every single one. The photograph, it was my sister's. She thought you'd never agree if you saw me. She was wrong to do that. I'm sorry. I never meant to deceive you." Thad's face darkened. "You lied." Rose flinched as if struck. "I hoped," she whispered. "I hoped you'd see who I am before what I look like." The sheriff, Tom Brennan, stepped forward, unease written across his face. "Ironwood, the lady's just arrived after a journey of 2,000 miles. Maybe this isn't the place—" "This is exactly the place," Thad snapped. "I sent money. I sent letters. I ordered a bride, not a heavy one instead?" The sheriff's voice was low, but the words carried. A few men laughed nervously. Someone snorted. A woman near the mercantile turned away, embarrassed. Rose straightened, humiliation burning hotter than the sun overhead. "Go ahead," she said bitterly, tears spilling despite her effort to stop them. "Say it. Everyone else does. I'll get back on the stage and disappear. I'm good at that." Silence followed. Not kind silence. Curious silence. Thad turned away sharply, already walking toward his wagon. "I won't marry a woman who starts with a lie." And just like that, he left her standing alone in the street. Sheriff Brennan approached her gently. "Miss Hartwell, I'm sorry. He shouldn't have—" "It's all right," Rose said, though it clearly wasn't. She lifted her chin, forcing herself to stand tall under the stairs. "Please tell me where I can wait for the return stage. I won't trouble your town any longer." As she struggled toward the hotel with her trunk, whispers followed her like shadows. That night, while Rose sat alone in a rented room with packed bags and a broken heart, the sheriff rode out to Thad Ironwood's camp. Because sometimes a man didn't need arresting. He needed the truth driven into him hard enough to hurt. And sometimes the woman the world laughed at was the very one fate intended to change everything. Before we continue, let me ask you, where are you listening from today? Whether you're at home or on the road, I wish you a warm and joyful Christmas. Now, let's get back to the story. Rose Hartwell had learned long before she boarded the westbound stagecoach that the world measured women quickly and cruelly. In Boston, she had been taught to keep to the shadows, to sit where she would not be seen, to dress plainly so no one could accuse her of vanity. At 560 pounds, there was no way to make herself small, so she learned instead to be quiet. Her family called it kindness when they hid her away. After their parents' deaths, Rose had been absorbed into her sister Lily's household like an embarrassment wrapped in obligation. Lily was slender, fashionable, married to a man who valued appearances above all else. Rose was the secret kept upstairs, the one not introduced to guests, the one spoken of in lowered voices. Doctors whispered words like defective and imbalance. Lawyers spoke casually about institutions, about how easy it was to commit a woman deemed unfit. Rose listened, smiled politely, and planned her escape in silence. The advertisement had felt like a lifeline. A mountain man, educated, solitary, seeking a companion, not a decoration. A man who wrote about books, about silver veins and snowstorms, about wanting someone to talk to when the fire burned low at night. Rose wrote back honestly, about her love of learning, about science and geology, about longing for a life where usefulness mattered more than appearance. She did not write about her body, not because she wanted to deceive him, but because she had learned that the moment she did, everything else she was vanished. When Lily insisted on sending her own photograph instead, Rose hesitated, argued weakly, then gave in. Just this once, she told herself, just long enough to be heard. Now she sat on the narrow hotel bed in Silver Ridge, humiliation pressing down on her chest like weight she could not shift. Outside her window, voices drifted up from the street. She knew some of them were talking about her, the heavy one, the wrong one, the mistake. She pressed her palms into her skirt, grounding herself. Thaddeus Ironwood had looked at her the way men always did when expectation met disappointment, with shock first, then anger, then dismissal. But worse than his words had been the laughter. Sheriff Brennan knocked softly at her door that evening. "Miss Hartwell," he said gently when she opened it, "may I come in for a moment?" She nodded, stepping aside. "I wanted to apologize," he said. "What happened today shouldn't have happened the way it did." Rose smiled faintly. "It always does." The sheriff sighed. "Ironwood's not a cruel man by nature, just proud, and pride makes fools of good men." "That doesn't change what he did," Rose replied quietly. "No," Brennan agreed. "It doesn't." She sat at the small table while he spoke of the town, of how few women lived this far into the mountains, of how lonely men grew out here. Rose listened politely, but her mind was already elsewhere. She would leave tomorrow. Another long ride, another return to a life she had risked everything to escape. That night, Thad Ironwood sat alone by his fire, whiskey untouched at his side, Rose's letters spread across his lap. He read them again, slower this time. Her handwriting was neat, careful, thoughtful. She had written about loneliness in a way that mirrored his own, about wanting a place where no one laughed when she entered a room, about dreaming of mountains because they did not judge, they simply endured. In one letter she had written, "I do not ask to be admired, I ask only to be allowed to exist without apology." Thad's jaw tightened. He remembered his own youth, being mocked for his size, being called dangerous, stupid, excessive. He had fled eastward expectations to carve a life where strength mattered more than manners. And yet, when faced with Rose, he had done exactly what he hated the world for doing to him. He slept badly, waking before dawn with the taste of regret sharp on his tongue. By the time the sun rose over Silver Ridge, Thad had made his choice. He bathed, shaved, and dressed carefully, not as a prospector, but as a man seeking forgiveness. When he reached the hotel, the noon stage was already being prepared. Rose stood near it, her trunk at her side, her posture straight and guarded. "Miss Hartwell," Thad said, removing his hat, "please, I need to speak with you." She looked at him without warmth. "You've said enough, Mr. Ironwood." "I said the wrong things," he replied, "and I'm asking for the chance to say the right ones." Her eyes flickered, wary but curious. "I judged you," Thad continued. "I let a picture matter more than the person who wrote me those letters. I became the very kind of man I despise." Rose's voice trembled despite her effort to keep it steady. "Do you have any idea what it costs a woman like me to hope, to believe for even a moment that someone might want me as I am?" Thad swallowed. "I do now." He gestured toward the mountains rising beyond the town. "I'm not asking you to marry me today. I'm asking you to stay, to let me show you who I am when I'm not afraid of being wrong." Silence stretched between them. Finally, Rose spoke. "I will stay, but understand this, Mr. Ironwood. I am not something to be corrected or tolerated. I will be respected, or I will leave." Thad met her gaze. "You have my word." She nodded once. The stagecoach driver called for boarding. Rose stepped back from the wagon. For the first time since she left Boston, she did not feel like she was running. They left Silver Ridge at dawn, before the town fully woke. Thad Ironwood hitched his team in silence, moving with the deliberate care of a man determined not to make another mistake. Rose stood a few steps away, her trunk already loaded, her hands folded in front of her as if bracing herself for disappointment. He noticed. "You don't have to stand there," he said, keeping his voice level. "You can sit in the wagon if you like." Rose studied him for a moment, measuring the words against the man who had spoken them. Then she nodded and climbed up, settling carefully on the bench. Thad took the reins without comment, and the wagon rolled out of town, wheels creaking softly as Silver Ridge disappeared behind them. The road climbed quickly, winding through pine and rock. Morning air carried the sharp scent of sap and cold stone. Rose watched the land unfold, vast and indifferent, and felt something loosen in her chest. "You wrote about this," she said after a while. "The way the mountains make you feel small, but not insignificant." Thad glanced at her, surprised. "You remember that?" "I remember everything you wrote," she replied quietly. They traveled in companionable silence for several miles. Thad slowed the team whenever the road grew rough, careful not to jolt her. He did not comment on her breathing when the climb steepened. He did not rush her when she asked for a short stop to stretch her legs. These were small mercies. They mattered. By midday the sun burned hot, and Thad called a halt near a stream shaded by cottonwoods. He watered the horses first, then handed Rose a canteen. "You all right?" he asked. "Yes," she said. Then, after a pause, "Thank you for asking." He nodded once, accepting the weight of that gratitude without trying to earn it cheaply. They ate in the shade, bread, cheese, apples wrapped carefully in cloth. Thad waited until Rose had settled comfortably before sitting himself, an unconscious habit that did not go unnoticed. "You don't have to do that," she said gently. "I know," he replied. "I want to." The road grew narrower as afternoon wore on. The wagon eventually gave way to a smaller trail, and Thad stopped beside a stand of aspens. "We'll go the rest on horseback," he said. "The path's too steep ahead." Rose hesitated. "I can ride. I just Haven't in a long while. Thad selected the broadest, calmest mare from the remuda, adjusted the saddle carefully, and stepped back to give her space. When she struggled to mount, he did not rush forward until she nodded for help. His hands were steady, respectful. They climbed into higher country as the day cooled, forest thickening around them. Snow lingered in shaded places despite the season, and the air thinned enough that Rose felt it in her lungs. "You can stop whenever you need," Thad said quietly. "I will," she answered, and she did. He waited without complaint. By evening, they crested a ridge that stole Rose's breath. Below them, tucked against stone and timber, stood a cabin that looked less like shelter and more like intention. "That's home," Thad said. Rose stared. "You built all that?" "Yes." They descended slowly. The cabin was solid, thoughtfully constructed, smoke already curling from the chimney. Inside, it was warm and clean. A wide hearth dominated the main room. Shelves held books, tools, and neatly kept ledgers. A table stood near the fire, sturdy and worn by use. "This room is yours," Thad said, opening a door to a space set apart. "I'll sleep out here." Rose turned, startled. "You don't have to." "I know," he said, "but I want you to feel safe." She stepped inside slowly. The bed was broad and well made, quilts thick and clean. No one had prepared a place for her in years. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely audible. That night, as wind moved softly through the trees and the fire burned low, Rose lay awake, listening to the sounds of a life she had not yet decided to trust. But for the first time, she allowed herself to rest. Morning came clear and cold. They settled into a rhythm over the next days. Thad showed her the mine, explaining each process without condescension. Rose listened, asked questions, and surprised him with observations sharp enough to stop him mid-sentence. "You've thought about this before," he said once. "I think about how things work," she replied. "People rarely ask." He did not laugh. Instead, he handed her a pencil and paper. "Show me." And she did. As they worked and walked and talked, something shifted between them. The tension did not vanish, but it softened. Respect began to replace apology. Curiosity replaced fear. One evening, as they sat outside watching the light fade from the peaks, Rose spoke carefully. "You hurt me in town," she said. "I won't pretend otherwise." "I know," Thad replied, "and I won't forget it." She nodded. "But you've been different since." "I'm trying to be better," he said simply. She considered him for a long moment. "Then I'll keep trying too." The mountains stood around them, ancient and indifferent witnesses. And somewhere between the climb and the quiet, a fragile trust began to take root. Life in the cabin did not soften overnight. It warmed slowly, like stone absorbing heat from a fire that had burned for a long time before anyone noticed. The first mornings were quiet. Rose woke early out of habit, her body trained by years of needing to stay unnoticed. She would lie still, listening to the low crackle of the fire Thad always lit before dawn and the muted sounds of him moving about the main room. He never entered her space without knocking, never lingered near her door. Boundaries, once drawn, were honored. When she finally stepped out, wrapped in a shawl against the mountain chill, she always found breakfast waiting, not elaborate. Oats cooked thick and hearty, bread warmed near the fire, sometimes eggs when he had them. He never commented on how much she ate. That alone felt revolutionary. They worked together in companionable silence at first. Rose swept the cabin, organized shelves that had once been governed by Thad's functional chaos, and learned the rhythm of mountain living. Thad repaired fencing, hauled wood, and tended the mine. When he saw her watching him split logs one afternoon, he paused. "Want to try?" Rose hesitated. "I'll show you." He adjusted the axe handle, demonstrated the stance, then stepped back. When she swung, the impact jarred her arms, but the log split cleanly. Her eyes widened. "I did it." "You did," Thad said, unmistakable pride in his voice. Something inside her loosened. In the evenings, they cooked together. Rose's hands were sure in the kitchen, transforming simple ingredients into meals that filled the cabin with warmth and scent. Thad learned quickly that she cooked not to impress, but to care. "You don't have to eat last," she said one night when she noticed him waiting. "I know," he replied. "I just like seeing you settled first." No one had ever waited for her before. After supper, they sat by the fire. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they read in comfortable silence. Thad's library astonished her. Engineering texts, philosophy, poetry. When she reached for a worn volume one night, he noticed. "That one's yours now," he said. "All of them?" she asked. He nodded. "Anything under this roof is shared." Weeks passed. Autumn deepened. Snow dusted the higher ridges. With each passing day, Rose felt herself changing, not shrinking, not apologizing, but expanding into space she had never been allowed to occupy. She spoke more, laughed once or twice, surprised by the sound of it. She offered opinions, and Thad listened as if they mattered, because they did. One afternoon, as they worked near the mine, Rose noticed a hairline fracture in the support timbers. "That beam's under stress," she said. "If the weight shifts after a thaw, it could collapse." Thad examined it closely, then looked at her with new eyes. "You're right. We need to reinforce it." He followed her suggestion without hesitation. That night, as they sat by the fire, Thad spoke quietly. "You know, most men wouldn't have noticed that." Rose shrugged. Most men weren't taught to observe quietly. He considered that, then nodded. The cabin grew warmer, not just from the fire, but from the way they moved around each other. Respect turned to trust. Trust turned to something gentler, more dangerous. One evening, a storm rolled in suddenly, wind howling through the trees, snow falling thick and fast. The cabin creaked under the weight of it. Rose startled awake, heart pounding, memories of being locked in small rooms rushing back. Thad was at her door in seconds, knocking softly. "Rose," he said, "it's just the storm. You're safe." She opened the door, her breath uneven. "Stay here tonight," he added. "By the fire. I'll take the chair." She hesitated, then nodded. They sat side by side as the storm raged outside. At some point, without comment, Thad draped a blanket over her shoulders. His arm brushed hers. She did not pull away. For the first time in her life, fear passed without turning into shame. In the days that followed, something unspoken settled between them. A shared glance held longer. A touch lingered briefly before retreating. Neither pushed, neither rushed. One night, Rose spoke what had been growing in her chest. "Thad," she said softly, "why are you so careful with me?" He stared into the fire for a long moment. "Because the world hasn't been, and because I know what it's like to be reduced to size instead of seen for substance." She swallowed. "You could have sent me away." "I could have," he agreed, "but I would have been lying to myself. I wanted you here, not as an obligation, as a person." Tears welled in her eyes, unbidden. "No one's ever said that to me." He turned to her fully. "Then let me say it clearly. Rose Hartwell, you are wanted here, exactly as you are." The words settled deep, steady, and solid like a foundation stone. By winter's edge, the cabin was no longer just shelter. It was home, not because it was warm, but because within its walls Rose was no longer hiding. And Thad, who had built his life to avoid judgment, found himself grateful for the woman who saw him clearly and stayed anyway. Winter arrived not all at once, but with intention. Snow gathered in quiet layers along the cabin roof, softening the sharp edges of the world. The mountains closed in, roads vanished, and isolation became absolute. For Thad, this was familiar territory. For Rose, it was both sanctuary and test. It was during one of those long, snow-bound evenings that the first secret surfaced. They were seated at the table, ledgers spread between them, the fire low and steady. Rose had been helping Thad review old claims and deeds, her neat handwriting bringing order to papers that had not been examined in years. "This one doesn't match," she said, frowning slightly. "The boundary markers on this claim don't align with the survey notes." Thad leaned over her shoulder. "That's impossible. That claim's been uncontested for years." Rose tapped the paper. "The dates are wrong, and this seal, look closely. It's not territorial, it's private." Thad went very still. "That means someone altered it," he said slowly. "Yes," Rose replied, "and not recently." Silence stretched between them. Finally, Thad exhaled. "I should have told you earlier." She looked up at him. "Told me what?" "That this land is worth far more than silver," he said. "A railroad survey passed through this valley 2 years ago. Quietly. They offered to buy me out. I refused. After that, I started noticing pressure. Officials asking questions. Men riding past the cabin who had no reason to be here." Rose's stomach tightened. "You think they're trying to force you out?" "I think they're trying to make my claim disappear," Thad said. "And if they succeed, they won't stop at paperwork." Outside, the wind pressed against the walls as if listening. A week later, the threat took form. 2 men arrived on horseback just after midday, their coats fine, their manner practiced. Rose watched from the window as Thad stepped outside to meet them, his posture alert but controlled. "We're with the Western Continental Railroad," one of the men announced, flashing a smile that did not reach his eyes. "We'd like a word about your claim." Thad crossed his arms. "You've already had your answer." "Circumstances change," the other man replied. "Accidents happen, claims lapse, especially when documentation is unclear." Rose stepped onto the porch before Thad could respond. "I've reviewed the documentation," she said calmly, "and the claim is valid." Both men turned, surprise flickering across their faces. "And you are?" one asked. "Mrs. Hartwell," Rose replied, holding his gaze, "and I keep the books." The men exchanged a look. "Well," the first said lightly, "perhaps the lady should stay out of matters she doesn't understand." Rose smiled thinly. "On the contrary, I understand fraud, coercion, and falsified surveys very well. If your company wishes to pursue this matter, I suggest you do so through proper legal channels. Any further attempts at intimidation will be documented." The men left shortly after, their smiles gone. That night, Thad said quietly, "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did," Rose replied. "You stood up for me when it mattered. Now it's my turn." He studied her, something like awe in his eyes. The rumors began soon after. Down in Silver Ridge, tongues wagged. A fat woman living alone with a mountain man, a deceiver who trapped him, a liability, a joke. One afternoon, the sheriff rode up unannounced. "Brennan," Thad greeted. "What brings you up here?" The sheriff dismounted, removing his hat. "Railroad men have been stirring things up, claiming you're unstable, that your wife's condition makes her unfit to manage property." Rose stiffened. Brennan met her eyes. "I don't believe a word of it, but others might." "What are they planning?" Thad asked. "A forced inspection," Brennan said grimly. "If they can declare the homestead unsafe or improperly managed, they can seize it." Rose said nothing for a long moment. Then she spoke. "Then we'll show them exactly how well it's managed." Preparation became their weapon. Rose reorganized every record, annotated every survey, cross-referenced dates and seals. Thad reinforced structures, repaired fencing, ensured every regulation was met down to the letter. When the inspection party arrived, they found a homestead run with precision and care. Rose stood beside Thad as the lead inspector sneered, "Didn't expect someone like you to handle such matters." She met his gaze evenly. "You should revise your expectations." That night, after the inspectors left empty-handed, Rose finally allowed herself to tremble. Thad found her by the fire, hands clasped tightly in her lap. "They'll keep coming," she said quietly. "I know," he replied, "and I'm sorry you're caught in it." She looked up at him. "I'm not caught. I chose this. I chose you." The words hung between them, fragile and fierce. Before Thad could respond, a gunshot cracked through the night. Wood splintered near the window. Rose gasped as Thad pushed her to the floor, his body shielding hers. Another shot, then laughter in the dark. "Message received," a voice called from the trees. "Sell or suffer." Silence followed. When Thad finally rose, his face was carved from stone. "This ends now," he said. Rose reached for his hand. "Then we face it together." He squeezed her fingers once. "Always." Outside, the storm gathered again, heavier this time, and somewhere beyond the trees, forces far larger than either of them were moving closer. The night after the gunshot, neither of them slept. Thad sat at the table cleaning his rifle with slow, deliberate movements, each motion practiced from years of survival. Rose remained near the fire, wrapped in a blanket, her mind racing but her voice steady. "They wanted to scare us," she said quietly. "Not kill us, not yet." Thad nodded without looking up. "That means they think fear will move us faster than law." "Then they've misjudged us," Rose replied. By dawn, fresh tracks circled the cabin. Horses, at least 3 men, close enough to remind them they were not alone, far enough to avoid confrontation in daylight. Sheriff Brennan arrived before noon, his expression grim. "I heard the shot," he said, "and I heard what followed. Railroad's denying involvement, of course. Says they've got nothing to do with intimidation." "Someone does," Thad replied flatly. Brennan turned to Rose. "You holding up?" She met his gaze. "I am, and I won't be leaving." The sheriff nodded, respect clear in his eyes. "Inspection board's coming back. Not officially. They'll say it's a safety review. Unofficially, they want leverage." "Then they won't get it," Rose said. That afternoon, 3 men rode up the path. No smiles this time, no polite words. "We're here to reassess," the lead man announced. "Complaints have been filed." "By whom?" Thad asked. "Concerned parties." Rose stepped forward, papers in hand. "You'll find all documentation in order. Any further harassment will be added to a growing file that already includes falsified surveys, intimidation, and attempted coercion." The man scoffed. You think anyone will believe you?" Rose's voice did not waver. "They already do." The standoff lasted hours. Questions, inspections, thinly veiled threats. Finally, the lead man lost patience. "You're protecting the wrong asset," he said coldly. "Land can be taken. Men can be broken." Thad took one step forward. "And women?" The man smirked. "Especially women like her." Before Thad could move, Rose spoke. "You're wrong," she said calmly. "You think my size makes me weak, that my presence makes this place unstable. But I have endured humiliation, confinement, and fear my entire life. You will not frighten me out of my home." The man laughed. "Home?" "Yes," Rose said, "my home, and I will stand in it." Silence followed. Then the men mounted their horses and left, their threats unspoken but heavy. That evening, Rose's composure finally cracked. "What if they come back at night?" she asked. "What if next time they don't miss?" Thad knelt in front of her. "Then I'll be here, and if I fall—" She cut him off. "No, we do not speak like that." He took her hands. "Then listen to me. You are not a liability. You are my strength, and if this comes to violence, I need you steady, not afraid." She nodded slowly. "Then don't try to protect me by pushing me away." "I won't," he promised. The attack came 2 nights later. They heard the horses first, then the torches. Flames licked at the edge of the timber pile, smoke curling into the dark sky. Thad grabbed his rifle. Rose grabbed the lantern and the papers. "Cellar," he ordered. "No," she said firmly. "I'm staying where I can see." The first man rounded the corner and froze when Rose stepped into the light. "You should have left," he said. "So should you," she replied. The shot came fast. Thad fired back. Chaos erupted. Horses screamed. Men shouted. Rose moved exactly where she was needed, relaying positions, keeping the fire from spreading, refusing to be hidden. When it was over, 2 men lay wounded. One fled into the trees. Sheriff Brennan arrived with deputies less than an hour later, drawn by smoke and sound. "Enough," Brennan said, staring at the captives. "This ends now." By morning, the truth was exposed. Witnesses, evidence, confessions. The railroad withdrew its claim. The cabin stood scarred but standing. At sunrise, Rose and Thad sat on the steps, watching smoke drift away. "I was afraid," Rose admitted, "but I didn't run." Thad looked at her with quiet reverence. "You stood." She leaned into him. "So did you." The mountains returned to silence, but nothing between them was uncertain anymore. Spring came slowly to the high country, as if the mountains themselves were cautious about change. Snow retreated in thin, reluctant lines along the slopes. The creek swelled and sang again. Pine needles shed their winter silence and breathed green back into the world. The cabin bore scars from the attack, darkened timber, a patched window, but it stood, solid and unashamed. So did they. Rose moved through the days with a steadiness she barely recognized as her own. Fear had not vanished, but it no longer ruled her. She slept through the night now, the kind of sleep that came from knowing she would not be dragged away or spoken over or hidden for someone else's comfort. Each morning, Thad rose early to tend the land. Each morning, Rose joined him when she was ready. No one rushed her. No one measured her usefulness by how little space she took. The world beyond the cabin still whispered. The town still watched. But the mountains did not care. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the ridgeline and set the peaks aflame with gold, Rose stood at the window, watching the light fade. "They'll try again," she said quietly. "Maybe not the railroad, maybe something else. People don't like being proven wrong. Thad stepped beside her. Let them come. She turned to him. You're not afraid? I am, he admitted, but I'd rather be afraid here with you than safe without you. The words settled between them, heavy with truth. They sat by the fire that night, not speaking much. The cabin glowed softly, lamplight warm against the dark. Outside, wind brushed the trees, familiar now, almost companionable. After a long while, Thad spoke. You know, he said, when I first placed that advertisement, I thought I was ordering a solution, a wife to fill a quiet space, someone to make the cabin feel less empty. Rose smiled faintly. And instead, he continued, I was given a partner, someone who made this place honest, who made me honest. She swallowed. I was terrified when I arrived. I thought I was stepping into another cage, another place where I'd be tolerated until I became inconvenient. He turned to face her fully. Are you tolerated here? No, she said, voice thick. I'm chosen. He nodded. Every day. Silence returned, but it was no longer empty. Later, when the fire burned low, Rose stood and moved toward her room. At the door, she paused. Thad, she said softly. Yes? You once asked me to stay, she said. Not as your wife, not yet, just as myself. He waited. I want to stay, she continued, not because I have nowhere else to go, but because I want this life, with you, with the mountains, with the work and the risk and the quiet. He did not speak immediately. When he did, his voice was careful, as if handling something fragile and precious. This will never be easy, he said. People will always have something to say. About you, about me, about us. Rose met his gaze, steady. They always have. That's not new. He stepped closer. I won't promise safety from the world, but I promise this. No one will ever make you smaller in this house. No one will take your voice, not while I breathe. Tears slipped down her cheeks, unbidden. That's all I ever wanted, she whispered. He reached out, not to claim, but to invite. When she stepped into his arms, it felt less like a beginning and more like recognition. They stood that way for a long time, firelight warming their backs, night pressing gently against the windows. Outside, the mountains kept their counsel. Inside, a home had been claimed, not by force, not by fear, but by two people who had chosen to stay. And though the road ahead remained uncertain, one truth was clear in the quiet that followed. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Every time I read your comments, I'm reminded that stories like this don't belong to one place, one body, or one kind of life. They travel across mountains, borders, and quiet nights, carrying the same question with them. What happens when someone finally feels chosen instead of judged? Rose's story is about more than love. It's about dignity, courage, and claiming a home in a world that tried to deny her space. I'd love to know where you're listening from right now. What part of the world are you in? And if you still believe that love can grow in the harshest places, stay with me. The next story is already waiting.